was shot.
So welcome back to Law News Network. I'm Heather Hansen, and I am so happy to be joined by our senior trial producer, Cathy Russon, who always has all of the information that is confusing me in these cases because she follows them so closely and so well. Welcome, Cathy.
Hi, Heather.
So we, first of all, heard some openings this morning that I know a lot of people were less than impressed with. Give me your review. Let's start with the prosecutor.
Yeah, well, it was a little disappointing, but I'm always judgmental of the attorneys during openings and closings, because look, I'm trying to look at it from a juror's perspective, from just average citizen. So they have these 15 people sitting in the jury box who know very, very little, if anything, about this case, and for the prosecution, I like to see passion. You need to get up there and have passion. And unfortunately, Hagerman was very monotone, flat affect. He delivered some powerful statements in that opening statement, statements attributed to the defendant and to the co-defendants that were like jaw-dropping, like horrific stuff, but he delivered it like this, and then he talked like this, and it's so hard to get into something or to feel any. He wants jury to feel some compassion here. He wants jurors to get angry about what's happened in this case, but he's not reflecting any of that on his own. Yeah. Now, I know some attorneys go way over the top with that stuff, but I mean, he just didn't show anything, so I was disappointed in that.
I agree with you, but I think some attorneys, myself included, we're so trained that your opening is supposed to be not an argument, but a statement, and that you're not supposed to be getting emotional at all. You just lay forward the facts, and then in closings, that's when you're allowed to get emotional and get more up in arms. So maybe that was it. For me, the most frustrating part of his delivery was the repetition. Did that work for you?
Okay, so it was so bad that we had people, trial watchers, thinking that we were on a loop, that there was a problem with the live stream, because he kept repeating the same comments that these defendants were using, but the way he was doing it was kind of disjointed, and you didn't really know that that's what he was doing. He was doing it obviously for effect, but yeah, I didn't like that either.
No, I felt as though I had a hard time even focusing on what it was that he was saying because of the way that he was saying it. And that's the worst thing that you can do when you're speaking to someone, is get them so focused on the delivery that they lose the message. And I think for me that happened. Now, you said that you actually did get some substance out of his opening. Tell us what you got that were the high points of his opening.
Well, we learned at least what law enforcement believes was things that were said by Zachary Adams and by Jason Autry. Now, Jason Autry's turned out to be a really bad guy in this case, which, by the way, he's going to be the state's star witness. It's going to be him. That's all they have. Right. Is really, they have some things that the brother Zachary said, Dylan said, but apparently I think he's going to plead the fifth. So I don't know what they're going to get exactly out of that. But Jason Autry is going to be their number one witness because he wants immunity. So the things we learned were things that what the prosecutor kept repeating over and over again. And I don't have it right. I don't have my notes right in front of me for the exact words, but talking about Holly Bobo saying that he couldn't have picked a prettier bitch. Right. And he said that over and over and over again. That's pretty awful when the jurors are sitting there knowing what has happened to this girl.
Oh, sure.
And then Jason Autry, allegedly, this came out in prosecution openings, sees a body wrapped in a blanket in the back of Zach's truck. And then they take her down by the river, and he talks about we need to gut her so she can sink to the bottom and won't float up. I mean, that's pretty disturbing, like very disturbing. Then they go to move her, and she's moving, so they realize she's still alive. And Zachary takes a gun and shoots her in the head. So this is all like powerful, for me, jaw-dropping stuff. I've heard some of it before, but jurors have heard none of it. And there was no passion from the prosecutor. Yeah. He told it all like this. And I was like, come on, guy, just give us something.
Yeah, the story could have been better told, and especially such a dramatic story. And the poor family member sitting in the room and seeing that and hearing that once again, which is going to be this entire trial for them. Let's talk about the immunity piece, though, because as I mentioned this morning, we've seen 2 cases recently with witnesses who were given immunity that were bad people, or a lot of us thought so. Aaron Hernandez, Alexander Bradley was given immunity, and Aaron Hernandez got off found innocent. Then we had Rochelle Bond was given immunity in the Michael McCarthy trial for the case of Bella Baby Bond, and there he was still found guilty. What do you think this jury is going to think when they hear from this bad guy who's been given immunity?
I don't know. It's going to be interesting in this case because they don't have any evidence. Like the lack of evidence tying the defendant to this case is a lot, really.
Right.
Because what they have is people talking. And so but they don't have any physical evidence. And they may, I don't know, they may have something. We don't know everything in this case. The problem with trying to analyze this case from our perspective is we don't have all the details. This case is so convoluted and has gone on so many years and so many different, I mean, you know, we could do a whole show like the TBI got in a fight with the lead investigator and the DA, and the TBI pulled out, that's Tennessee Bureau of Investigations, they pulled out completely and they wouldn't investigate any case in that county. Like, it's been a lot of crazy stuff. So, as far as Jason Autry's testimony, you know, who knows? He's going to get up there and he is going to be the bad guy.
Right.
You know, Alexander Bradley, you kind of knew he was a drug dealer and whatever. But for the most part, I think people kind of related to him and thought he held his own against Baez, things like that. With Jason Autry, I'm not sure we're going to see that. I'm not sure we're going to see anything likable or endearing or maybe not even believable out of him.
Which is much like what we saw with Rochelle Bond, and yet her testimony was enough to put McCarthy away. So we have seen cases where this can sort of spin both ways. I want to follow up on the point that you made, because it was one thing. I didn't get a lot out of the prosecutor's opening. I had a difficult time sort of, because of the way that he was speaking, sort of grasping onto any issues. But I did think he made a very good point about trying to explain the lack of forensic evidence, because there is none, as you said, or at least we anticipate there's going to be none. And we've heard a lot of news that there is none. And I was waiting for how is he going to deal with that. And the way he dealt with it is to say that so many years had passed between the murder and the time that they arrested Zach Adams that any physical evidence would have been lost. And I think that that's at least, you know, juries want to grab onto some explanation if they're going to let all the evidence rule the day. And that at least gave them that to hold on to.
No, exactly. And that is, whenever we see, well, you know, it's not a cold case, but it was getting there. It was pretty much getting to be a cold case. And we see that evidence is scarce. I mean, there's hardly anything out there. And a lot of times it's, we get it from testimony from somebody that guy confessed to. A lot of times it's through that people are convicted when it's an older case like this. It's going to come down really to Jason Autry and what the jury believes of him. And they will get some statements in from Dylan Adams. I don't know, without him testifying, I don't know how. Other than that, you know, they're going to tie in. Apparently there's a blonde. See, this is the thing. It's very convoluted, so I don't know what's going to come out in trial and what's not, because I've been following this case for years, so there's a lot of stuff going on in my head about it. But I know. And so what actually ends up being true and not, I know I have a hard time. I have to keep a lot of notes on this case. But there is apparently a blonde hair that was found, but it's not even clear if that hair has been tested. So we don't know from pretrial hearings or any documents that we can get our hands on in this case if the testing was done and what the results of that testing is. So maybe they have that. I don't know. The videotape, that's another thing we could talk about, the non-existent videotape that was testified to at pretrial hearings.
Well, and that comes into the brother, Dylan Adams. Isn't he that part of his confession too, that there was some sort of a videotape of some of the terrible sexual acts that took place between Adams and Holly Bobo?
Well, it gets more convoluted. I'm going to use that word way too much during this trial, but it gets even more than that. So 2 other guys were arrested in this case, the Piercy brothers. And since then, their charges were dropped. And they were arrested for like hindering after the fact or something like that. And because one of the Piercy brothers was living with a woman, and that woman told law enforcement and then came in and testified at a pretrial hearing that Piercy showed her a video that he had that showed Holly Bobo being sexually assaulted by Zachary Adams. Okay? So she testified that she saw it and that she only saw a portion and then said shut it off and she didn't want to see it anymore. And that was it. So that's how we knew how the Piercys would be involved. Is somebody's got that video or they've seen it or they have it or whatever. Well, now charges were dropped against them. Right. And as far as we know, no video was ever produced on that. So we just have the word of the one girlfriend that says she saw it.
Who may or may not testify. She wasn't brought up by either side. I do want to push back a little and talk to you about the defense opening statements, because I know you, like many people, were frustrated by that. Why don't you tell us about how you felt about it, and then I'll try to push back a little bit.
Okay, it's very hard for me. Anyone that follows my personal Twitter account sees what I tweeted out, which was like, I can't follow this. I couldn't follow her. And I know, well, I say I know a lot about this case, but again, a case is confusing, but I have followed this case for many years, so I know more than the jurors do. And she was all over the place. She threw out so much information to that jury that these average citizens have to be thinking, I'm assuming that somebody on that jury is thinking, I don't even know what she's talking about. I'm just going to see what the evidence produces, because she threw out, now this was good too, but she threw out, so many different names that they investigated and what happened with those investigations. But she talked as fast as I talk, and she was going on and on and on, and then jumping to this subject and then jumping to that subject. She wanted to basically vomit out everything she knew about this case in that short little time period to people who don't know anything about the case or very little about the case. And for me, it was very hard to follow her. The basis of her opening was, it's not my guy. They had to arrest somebody. It had been 3 years, and the town was crying for an arrest. Mm-hmm. And they are going off a bad guy. She kept calling Jason Autry a bad guy, and Dylan Adams having a very low IQ. And so she focused on those two things. So basically, it's not my guy, but police had to arrest somebody, and so that's why he's sitting here.
Yeah, I mean, I thought, she said something at the beginning about drinking from a fire hydrant, and that's what this case is. I mean, it is such a rush of information. And I do think if your job on the defense side is to raise reasonable doubt, to put forward, I mean, she named, I wish I had counted them. She named, I think, 6 or 7 people who had been investigated, including the brother, including every neighbor nearby. And the lengths they went to, the investigators went to do these investigations, subpoenaing people and setting up listening devices on their homes. And then the lengths they went to at the Adams home, where they cut into the floor the size of a car down to the ground to try to find some evidence. I think that in some ways her strategy may have been to show that this was an enormous, I mean, so much that you can't really understand it, amount of investigation in a desperate attempt to find someone to blame. And I do think, some people were asking why she was bringing up politics, but I think that in this community, this has been a major issue, sort of like in the Bill Cosby case. The prosecutor ran on prosecuting Bill Cosby. This prosecutor has run on finding and prosecuting and bringing justice for Holly Bobo. So I do think it was a lot of information. I agree with you on that, but I think that she had a lot of information to relay, and maybe it could have been just a little bit more organized.
Yeah. Well, remember, we're not even in the county where this happened.
Right.
The judge moved this trial to a different county because where this happened is so inundated with coverage of the Holly Bobo case. Yeah. And they had flyers and ribbons up all over that town, even leading up to the local courthouse there for pretrial hearings. It was, and people, and bumper stickers on people's cars. And so the whole town, and so yes, the DA ran on that. We're going to find Holly Bobo's, we're going to find out what happened to her, because she was just, she had disappeared for those years until they finally found parts of remains, by the way. Yes, so that's where the political aspect came to. But I'm just telling you right now, I have to go back and watch the defense openings again, because I zoned out at one point. I could not follow what she was trying to tell them. And I think my guess is the average citizen in that jury box was the same way.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the chatters felt the same way. For me, her opening was a lot more helpful for me than the prosecutors were in understanding the case as someone who has not followed it for the years that you did. But, you know, ultimately, the one thing that us lawyers can feel better about when we've had a bad opening is that they're not evidence and they're not supposed to make any difference. It's supposed to be the evidence and the testimony that you hear from the people in the witness box. So let's talk about that. I think the father's first name is Dana Bobo. He testified first. What did you think of his testimony? Well, first of all, from an emotional standpoint, but second, as to what he brought to the case.
Okay, yes, very emotional. Now, for our viewers, I just want to put it out there, we can't help the camera shot. So the prosecutor is covering the witness a lot of the time. It's where the judge has the camera set up, and there's not a lot we can do about that. However, when we did get to see him, when she would move out of the way, and then definitely hear him, it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking for me. So for one is just the way he sounds, and maybe it's his accent, his strong accent from Tennessee, but he just sounds like, look, a down-to-earth, good old boy kind of guy that has had his world completely torn apart. And when he testified that he searched every single day for his daughter for 3 years. Yeah. And he did not give up until the day they told him her remains were found. And until that day, for 3 years, he had searched for her. And that, I think, and when he said that, his voice broke and he started to get emotional. And you see that from this father. Very, very touching, very powerful. I think he was a great witness to start out of the gate with, because he was just like believable. He was like, look, I guess they were suspecting us, and we had all this law enforcement on our front lawn, you know, right after. And he said, I finally just said to them, look, if you really think any of us had to do with it, leave like 10 officers here to watch us and go find my daughter.
Right.
You know, that was powerful too.
I thought that was one of the most compelling pieces for me as well. But I also think in some ways that also plays into the defense's theory that they were sort of just grasping at straws and looking anywhere and wandering around and didn't have a plan. And so I thought that was interesting. It's certainly something that stood out for me. And you know what stood out for me? That was, I actually got teary about it at the beginning, because he said something about leaving in the morning, and he said, goodbye, I love you, because we're a family that always says that they love each other. And you know, if you're lucky enough to come from a family that says that every time that you leave one another, at least he knows that those were the last words that he spoke to his daughter, which has to give him some solace in this terrible situation.
So I guess, yes, I mean, you definitely don't want something to happen to your child and you haven't said that to them that day. I understand that. I'm just telling you, doing what I do now for a living has actually changed the way I mother my children. Yeah. You would think I'd be more protective of them because of this bad world we live in, and it's not really that. I don't really feel like that. But that is what you just spoke to, is how I'm a different parent. I didn't grow up in a home where you said I love you every single day. Right. We didn't do that. It wasn't the dynamic of our family. I do it every day to my kids multiple times, and my 16-year-old son kind of rolls his eyes, because if he walks out of the house and doesn't say it back to me, I follow him out. and I jokingly say things to my kids like, you don't know if we're ever going to see each other again. Now, all you remember is you didn't tell your mother you love her back, you know, and he grins, but he actually now he likes it that I do that. But yeah, so I mean, that as a side note, her father at least knows that she had no doubt of his love for her.
That's right. And this whole family, and I am eager and yet a little bit dreading to hear from the brother, Clint, because he saw Holly, according to reports, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, Cathy, because you know these facts so much better than I do, but he saw Holly outside with someone in camouflage and assumed that it was Drew, the boyfriend. And to have to live with the idea that you were seeing her with the person who ultimately abducted her just has to be one of the most terrible things in the world. Do you think we'll hear from him in the prosecution's case?
Yes, so I was going to say, I'm assuming we're going to hear from Clint Bobo, and he was the last person to see her. He saw her walking off into the woods behind their house with someone in camouflage, and like you said, assumed it was her boyfriend and thought nothing. Now what he knows, you know, he could have ran after her, he could have stopped, you know, whatever. That a brother is going through that. Plus, he was a suspect. They treated him like a suspect for a long time. I mean, what this family has gone through.
Oh, unbelievable.
So how horrific is it to have your daughter and sister kidnapped, killed, raped, all of that? Now, on top of that, we get no sympathy or empathy from law enforcement and for anybody like that because you guys are lying to us. That's how they feel. And so then I can't imagine. I really can't imagine.
Now, I do have to say, from the defense's point of view, not cross-examining the father was a very good idea. Don't you agree?
Oh, can't tell you how many trials that we sit and watch, and our chat room will say, "Don't question her. Don't cross-examine her. She's just been crying about her daughter or her sister or her child or whatever. Don't question." And that's exactly that. What were they going to get out? I mean, they got out of him the phone number, which will be interesting. So the only question the defense asked the father was what was his phone number back then, and he couldn't remember. And she actually said a phone number out loud, and he still said, "No, that wasn't it, but I don't remember what mine was." Just so she could get that in, because obviously that'll come back later when they talk about phone records.
Yeah, and I think that was with the boyfriend, but you're 100% correct. She didn't. You're right. She didn't question the father, but with the boyfriend, there was something about that number. And in her opening, she talked about the fact that the cell phone records are going to be so very important. So that is, I found the same thing. It was one of the things I specifically noted, that be listening for the cell phone records. And I think maybe you find it more interesting than I do, but sometimes the cell phone testimony is a little bit boring for me, but this is going to be really important. So it's important that we pay close attention to these cell phone witnesses, because where the cell phones were with regards to the people with immunity who are going to be saying they were with Adams is going to be really important, right?
Let me tell you the importance of cell phone records, and whether you zone out on it or not, or whether you lose jurors or not, is all on presentation. So it's all, I don't know that everyone in our 2 chat rooms, when cell phone testimony comes on, everybody goes, "Okay, well, this is the time I'm going to go scrub my tub." Like they don't want to hear it. But I have seen trials where the prosecutor's done such a fantastic job with a board and a display and a diagram and walks the jury through. This is where her cell phone was. This is where his cell phone was. And if you do it that way, then it's like, oh, now I have a visual and I can follow a path here. We saw a case in Michigan where he was, Van Callis was his last name, and he was convicted of murdering a 15-year-old girl just on a trail that he didn't even know. It was awful. The way he was convicted was from cell phone. And she had a fitness app on her phone, and because she was walking the dog, and the fitness app tracked her footsteps, and they showed that, and it was fascinating to see a chart of her footsteps and then where her cell phone traveled, and they showed his motorcycle going past like surveillance cameras in the same path of her cell phone traveling. So see, if you can do cell phone testimony in a way where just an average citizen goes, oh, then that's why I always find cell phone evidence fascinating. You just kind of have to weed through it sometimes.
Yeah, no, and then any testimony that is scientific or that's sort of dry, the attorney, it's incumbent on the attorney to turn that into part of the story and to really make it part of the story. For anyone who listened to the Serial podcast, the cell phone part of that podcast I thought was fascinating. So there are ways to do it, but in the cases that we've seen most recently, it hasn't been done very, very well.
No, and if you don't, if you don't live in the area, now this will come up because these jurors don't live in the area.
That's right.
So they'll be just like me and you, who in most of these trials haven't been to most of these places. You don't have any visual in your head of what they're talking about or about who went where or when. And so it'll be even more important for them to lay this out really clearly for the jurors.
Cathy, there's one thing that I wanted to talk to you about, because you were nice enough to send us an email this morning telling us the makeup of the jury. And I think that's something we sometimes forget to discuss. Do you remember offhand? I can look up the email if you don't, but do you remember the makeup of the jury?
It's even. I mean, there's 15, so it's like 8 and 7. Right. I can't remember women or men, but it's 8 and 7 is the breakdown. Right. So I'm not sure it matters anyway. I don't know that sex of the jury matters in a case like this. I think men are just as passionate as women when a girl is raped and murdered.
For sure.
So I don't think I don't think that part matters so much.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's always interesting to sort of, even more interesting if we could have someone have their eye on the jury, because the jury's body language and their responses to the witnesses and so forth. Before I let you go, I do want to talk to you just a second about LOYA, because we sort of forget, with the excitement of Holly Bobo starting, that we're waiting for a verdict in the LOYA case. Were you surprised that the judge didn't call a mistrial given the defendant's actions on Friday afternoon?
Okay, so let me just tell you that without LawNewz Network, the judge never knows that LOYA did that.
I know.
Okay, so they go to a sidebar right before the jury sent out to deliberate. The judge finished his instructions, and then he says 1 minute and calls counsel off to the side. And when everyone's backs are turned, LOYA turns and he says, I don't care what the jury thinks they heard. I heard it clearly, and I've listened to it over and over again. He says guilty. Then he looks and says it again, and then he looks and says it again. He's looking at over the jury box, and I freak out as the trial producer, because I think I thought he was turning to his attorney and saying that. I thought there was another attorney, because you couldn't see off camera to the right of him, and I thought we were picking up conversation we shouldn't. So I was immediately asking our person that's in the courtroom what just happened, and he wrote back and said, "Oh my gosh, the defendant just turned to the jury. There was nobody between him and the jury at all," and whispered that to the jury. And so I tweeted it out with a clip from it. Well, they sent the jury off to deliberate, and after that happened, the judge was pulled out into the hallway and shown my tweet with that clip. And then they had to come back in. So that's the story behind that. So to your point, I said, oh, someone's going to motion for a mistrial.
Absolutely.
For sure. There was never a motion for mistrial. So then I had to think about it for a little bit, and I thought, the prosecution doesn't want a mistrial.
Right.
I don't think they have proven that this guy was insane. So I think the prosecution has a great case, and they don't want a mistrial. And the defense, I mean, it was their own guy. You know, the judge admonished him. We have that also. Viewers can go back and watch both these. We have both of these on our YouTube channel. But the judge admonished him, and I was shocked at that too. The judge says, "You are trying to sabotage this trial." You know, he got all over him. Right. For me, it made him look a little more crazy. That's the first thing I thought. Right. But the judge was not buying that. The judge was like, "You've been found competent, and you are trying to sabotage this trial. And if we have any more problems, then you will watch the rest of the proceedings from a video back in your cell."
Yeah, I was shocked. I was shocked that no one moved for a mistrial. I'm shocked that the judge didn't just declare a mistrial, and I cannot wait to see what this jury does. I do think one thing I wanted to point out, it is fascinating and important for us all to recognize that the jurors all heard different things than what you heard, Cathy, and you're really sure about what you heard, and I think you can go back and watch it yourself. I agree with Cathy that that's what he said. But it just goes to show, as you listen to witnesses at trials, and different people hear different things, or different people testify to different things, and you think, oh, they're a liar. People hear things differently, sitting in the same room, looking at the same man. It's unbelievable.
That's a great point. We always talk about how unreliable eyewitness and ear witness testimony is, and this proves it right there. So the judge questioned the jurors individually after this to see what they had, and we got to report it. We didn't get to show that, but we got to report it from our person in the courtroom. And every juror that says they did hear something, not all of them did. Every one of them said they heard him say not guilty. And I was like, I don't think so. So and so then I want to know, is that what's in their heads, that they believe that's what the defendant would have been saying to them? Right. And then that brings in a whole other aspect of what is this jury thinking?
And it's so important, because every single person, whether you're a jury member or whether you're someone who sees a crime or whether you're someone who's affected by a crime, you bring your own personal experience to it, and it does impact what you see and what you hear, your own perspective. So it's going to be so fascinating, and we continue on Verdict Watch, guys. We will bring you the verdict as soon as we've been watching the courtroom. The people have been in and out, but nothing major going on. So we'll continue to bring you that. We'll also continue to bring you Cathy, because she brings us all of the little insights that the rest of us don't know. So Cathy, thank you so much for being on with me again. And we'll have you again, I'm sure, as this case, the Holly Bobo case, continues.
Thank you.